Our long-standing relationship with the United States, a bond built on growing cooperation, is now behind us. We've moved past the shock of what many Canadians call America's betrayal, but the lessons stay fresh in our minds. Both countries once had little affection for Trump, and now we hear he's returning to the White House. This time, however, any partnership will be on our terms, not theirs. There could still be a win-win, but only if it's fair. It all started with loud threats. President Donald Trump, known for his blunt style, unexpectedly targeted Canada, America's quiet, reliable neighbor. His administration imposed tough tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. Why? Because Ontario Premier Doug Ford made a comment Trump's team found insulting. Trump took it personally, and when he feels attacked, he strikes back hard. But this time it wasn't China or Iran. It was Canada, a country that had stood with the U.S. in war, diplomacy, and trade. Suddenly, this peaceful alliance looked like it might collapse into a trade war. The first warning came during a live press conference. Talks of electricity tariffs and public threats lit the fuse. Let's break down how things escalated so fast and unraveled just as quickly. The administration claimed Ontario's premier had threatened to cut electricity to the U.S., a move Trump's team called outrageous and dangerous. They said Trump had a duty to protect Americans, so they responded with a 25% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum. The very next day, tariffs on these metals rose to 50%. U.S. steel and aluminum companies, already benefiting from earlier Trump policies, welcomed the move. They saw it as a chance to boost local production and increase exports. Trump framed the tariffs as protecting American jobs and factories. His spokesperson Caroline Leavitt called Ford's comment a national security risk, using strong words like egregious, insulting, and unacceptable. But was this really about electricity, or was it about control? For decades, the U.S. and Canada have shared energy grids, pipelines, and resources. Many northern U.S. states rely on Canadian electricity and natural gas. So when Premier Ford expressed frustration, it wasn't just political posturing. It was seen as a hostile act. The White House didn't hesitate. Within hours, new tariffs were imposed. U.S. industries cheered, thinking this was a victory. But Canada wasn't China. It wouldn't stay quiet. Canadian industries hit back fast. Trump's administration defended the tariffs by accusing Canada of ripping off the U.S. for years. Leavitt even showed a chart highlighting high tariffs on American products like cheese and butter, nearly 300% in some cases. She also mentioned Japan, which imposes a 700% tariff on rice. The message was clear. America was finally standing up for itself. Trump wanted reciprocity, not charity. Yes, Canada has high tariffs on some dairy products. But that's part of a system meant to support local farmers, just like America's subsidies for corn and soy. Trade isn't just numbers. It's about relationships, compromises, and trust. These dairy tariffs weren't new. They were well known during NAFTA talks. So why bring them up now? To many, it felt like political theater, not genuine policy. Worse, these new tariffs risked backfiring. U.S. car makers, builders, and manufacturers rely on affordable Canadian steel and aluminum. As prices rose, fears of job losses grew, exactly what Trump claimed to protect. Panic spread on both sides. Stock markets dipped. Supply chains wobbled. Canada didn't respond with fear. It responded with determination. Within days, the trust that had defined U.S.-Canada relations for generations was at risk. Trump's hardline approach, meant to intimidate, had instead awakened a sleeping giant. What Trump didn't expect was how united Canadians would become after his threats. Canada didn't reply with more tariffs, passive-aggressive press releases, or polite diplomatic notes. Instead, the Prime Minister delivered a bold, emotional speech that resonated worldwide. He spoke directly and passionately, saying what many were thinking but hadn't dared say aloud. America under Trump could no longer be trusted. This wasn't just about trade anymore. It was about identity, dignity, and Canada's independence. A country that had stood by the U.S. through every war and crisis was now warning its people. America was trying to break us. President Trump wants our land, our resources, our water, our country, but it will never happen. These weren't empty words. They were a warning. Canada's Prime Minister called this a historic turning point. The old relationship with the United States, based on deepening cooperation, was finished. The post-1-2 global trade system, anchored by American leadership, was undone. That system wasn't perfect, but it helped Canada grow, and Canada had learned its lesson. No more naive trust, no more depending on a superpower that could turn its back overnight. The betrayal hurt, but it also sparked a new mindset. In his closing message, the Prime Minister said, "No matter where you live, what language you speak, or how you voted, I will do everything I can to represent all Canadians." This wasn't just diplomacy, it was a declaration. He was saying that America wants to control Canada. Few would expect to hear that from a world leader, but that shows how serious things had become. Trump's actions didn't just start a trade dispute, they shifted Canada's national identity. Canada, once closely tied to the U.S. through trade, culture, and defense, was now beginning to publicly distance itself. And it all began with a tariff. The Prime Minister called it a hinge moment in history. In simple terms, it was a turning point. The end of one era and the start of something very different. For over 70 years, Canada had thrived on its close relationship with the United States. Since World War II, both countries grew together through open trade. Canada exported oil, electricity, and raw materials south. In return, the U.S. sent cars, machinery, and investment north. But then Trump came and changed everything. Instead of teamwork, he used threats. Instead of fair talks, he used power plays. This kind of approach might work on smaller, weaker countries, but not on Canada. Canada didn't respond with force or insults. Instead, it simply said, "We're done being taken for granted." This speech wasn't just for Canadians. It was a message to every U.S. ally who has ever wondered, can we still trust the United States? "When I meet with President Trump," the Prime Minister said, "it will be to talk about the future of economic and security ties between two sovereign countries. And we do so knowing that we have many, many other ways to grow prosperity, not just through the U.S." This line was more important than it seemed at first. When the Prime Minister said two sovereign nations, he wasn't just pointing out geography. He was sending a diplomatic reminder. We are equals. Words matter. This time, Canada spoke loud and clear. It would no longer act like the quiet little brother or a background cheerleader. The era of automatic support was over. And that bit about having many, many other options? It wasn't just tough talk. It was real. Since 2016, Canada has been building closer trade ties with the European Union through the CETA agreement. The post-Brexit UK is also looking for trusted partners, and Canada fits the bill. Other allies like Japan, South Korea, and Australia already have good relations with Canada. Far from being isolated, Canada is part of the G7, NATO, and dozens of trade networks. In fact, it has more free trade deals than the US. When Trump thought Canada had no choice but to follow his plan, he made a serious mistake. Here's why that matters. Canada supplies key resources the U.S. depends on, from oil and gas to lumber, fertilizer, and electricity. American systems rely heavily on Canadian exports. In 2023 alone, Canada was the top energy supplier to the U.S., providing over 90% of hydroelectric imports and 70% of fertilizer needs. So when Ontario's premier hinted at cutting power exports, it wasn't just symbolic. It was a real, practical threat. If pushed too hard, Canada could use this leverage. This moment was the first clear sign that Trump's aggressive, confrontational style comes with a cost, not just with rivals, but even longtime friends. And when a friendship this old is shaken, fixing it isn't easy. Canada's firm stand sent a message to the world. Respect matters. Loud threats and political showmanship can't replace real diplomacy. Trump may have thought he was showing strength, but Canada didn't respond with fear. It responded with unity.